Hello, everybody. How are you? Let's go ahead and get started. It looks like we're going to have some people joining early on, but I want to introduce myself first. So my name is Eric Reifenberg. I appreciate you joining this event. I spent 15 years negotiating from the front lines with some of the world's largest companies. My teams and I, we closed hundreds of millions of dollars worth of deals. The biggest deal we ever worked on was a $200 million deal with a large mobile phone handset company. I'll let you guess who they are. And, I started out my career as a key account manager. That was my first sales job. And that's what we're going to focus on today, is going through that process of taking on a new account. Looking back now, I realize how unprepared I was and how much I've learned since then. So I'm going to share with you the story about my first account, $50 million account. And I'm going to talk through all the mistakes I made, and I'm going to talk through what the customer did really well. So what did they do well on the procurement side? And the idea is that we can learn from this. And I think it's a great way to learn, is to learn from your mistakes. So I'm going to be, humbly pointing out a lot of my mistakes to all of you. So in 2002, right out of business school, I started working for Emerson Electric in Vienna, Austria as a project manager. So I had gone to university for my graduate degree in Austria, and I wanted to stay. I wanted to learn the language. I wanted to live in a foreign country and work, not just go to school. So I was fortunate enough to get a job. And about 2 years into that job as a project manager, our business unit president offered that I take over the Nortel account. So we were in the telecom business unit at Emerson Electric, and we were selling power supplies into that space. So I was pretty excited. I had never had a sales job. And this job was going to take me back to the US. So after 4 years, I was ready to go back. Living in Austria was great, but it wasn't good if you're not Austrian, really ambitious and really young. So the boxes weren't checked for me. So I jumped at the chance to go back to the US and take over this job. Nortel was one of our largest gross margin accounts in the business unit. It was $50 million, very profitable. So this was a huge opportunity for me. My first sales job, and someone's actually going to give me an account worth $50 million. I didn't want to screw this up. So as I said before, we were selling them power supplies. So these are power supplies that were embedded within telecom equipment. And, quite frankly, if the power supply fails or doesn't turn on, the equipment doesn't turn on. If the equipment doesn't turn on, Nortel's offering is useless. So this was a really important relationship. Now, we weren't fully sourced on all the products we sold, but there was a large group of products that we sold to them that we didn't have a competitor. So we were the only game in town. So upon taking this job, I moved to Denver, never been to Colorado in my life, really exciting time in my life. And about 2 months into this new role, I get an email from Nortel inviting us to participate in the annual negotiations for the business. So I was a little confused at this point. Remember, I'm brand new in sales, and an existing customer where we have a lot of sole source parts is inviting me to participate in the annual negotiations. So I thought that was strange. But, nevertheless, I really wanted to impress management. I wanted to do a good job. I was pretty excited about this. So I read through the email, and this is something a lot of you may see in your businesses. There were some preconditions to doing business with them that they had outlined in this email. At this time in my career, I really didn't know how to deal with it. But what they listed was, number one, their expectation was that we were going to give them a 10% cost reduction on $50 million. Are you serious? So I didn't even know what to think at this point. Second thing they had on there is they wanted us to show them open book pricing. So they wanted to look at what all our costs were. They wanted to look at our conversion times, our conversion rates. They wanted to look at what our margins were. And of course, they wanted to do this because they wanted to influence our margins and get lower prices, right? So that's what they wanted. The other thing they wanted is they wanted to move us to 90-day payment terms. We were currently at 45-day payment terms, but they wanted us to be at 90. And they also wanted the opportunity to do Kaizen events. So they wanted to come to our factories and take some of the high running products that we produce for them and do a evaluation on the labor times that we put into it so that we could reduce the labor times, thus reducing our labor costs, and of course, pass the savings on to them. So those are the 4 things they wanted: 10% cost reduction, extended payment terms, open book pricing, and Kaizen events. So at this time, first sales job, just finished business school. about a year and a half to 2 years before that. So where to start was absolutely clear. I made a spreadsheet. I mean, that's what I was really good at in my life at that time. I learned how to make spreadsheets. So I put together the mother of all spreadsheets. We had 200 part numbers that we were selling, Nortel, and I wanted to see what the data was going to tell us. So I put together all kinds of cool formatting and formulas and all this stuff. And I looked at 3 years of data. So for each part number one, were we sole sourced? We're the only game in town. Number two, what was our volume looking like year over year? What was our pricing looking like year over year? And what was our gross margin looking like? And what I found was the volume was going down on many of the part numbers year over year. And for some unknown reason, we were giving them price reduction along the way, which didn't really make sense to me. Remember, I was brand new to sales, didn't really understand things, but from a quantitative point of view, I couldn't understand why we were losing margin because we were giving up price on declining volumes. So that's the first thing I discovered. So I scratched my head and said, okay, got my cool spreadsheet together. Now I need to start looking at the qualitative side of the story. So the first thing I did is I went to inside sales and said, like, where are we on this account? How are we doing as far as delivery? Because we must really be screwing up if we're giving them cost reduction on declining volume. We were about 96% on time across almost 200 part numbers out of 3 factories. That's really good. So we were doing an excellent job at on-time delivery. I don't remember off the top of my head what the defects parts per million was, but I remember we had a very high quality score. So we were shipping them very high, like complete shipment with parts that were, meeting the quality requirements. So that was good. And remember, before I took the job as a salesperson, I was working in the engineering organization as a project manager. So I had been working on Nortel projects. So I had a lot of experience with us bringing technology to Nortel. One of the big challenges that there is in telecom is you have a lot of equipment that has to sit outside. So right now I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. You can imagine in Phoenix during the summer, you have some telecom equipment that's outside or any electronic equipment that's outside. You've got to get the heat out. That was something we were really good at. So we brought some pretty good innovations around packaging and helping them solve some technical problems with their telecom equipment. So, first we've got the qualitative side of the story, declining volumes, declining margins because we're giving away price, but we're on-time delivery, high quality, and we're contributing a lot of technical know-how to them. So it wasn't really making sense. So, I thought I was a good salesperson at the time, and I know now I was terrible. But I started thinking about and focusing on what I wanted. It didn't even enter my mind that I should be totally focused on what they need and what they want. But I was pretty selfish back then and, new to sales. And incidentally, I see this with most of my clients. One of the biggest mistakes I see with my clients is their sales organization. The individuals are too focused on themselves. And this really hurts them when it comes to negotiations. But I made the same mistake. Okay, so I'm thinking what I wanted. So let me give you a little bit of a background. So management wanted to keep the account at $50 million. It was a high gross margin account. We were using those gross margin dollars to build up a sales organization in Asia. So at the time, Huawei was coming into the telecom space and basically destroying the pricing and putting a lot of pressure on the US and European telecom operators. In fact, almost all of them are out of business now, with the exception of Ericsson. Maybe Nokia, Siemens might be in business. I'm not sure. I don't follow it as much anymore. But so there's a lot of pressure going on, and we needed to establish a sales organization in Asia to cover some of these new Asian entrants to the market. So therefore, I had to keep my account flat. So if I have declining revenue, declining volume on part numbers, the only way I'm keeping my revenue flat is to go out and win new projects. So it was clear to me what I wanted. And I was very focused on what I wanted, which was to win new projects. Unfortunately, Nortel didn't give a damn about that, right? I was just thinking about myself. So I put together the business case, shared it with management, and we decided to send our offer. We weren't necessarily making the opening offer because psychologically the negotiation was anchored by Nortel with their preconditions. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So we turned in a 1% cost reduction. We said, no way, we can't do open book pricing. We don't do it with anybody. Thank you very much for that offer to extend our terms to 90 days, but we'll pass. We're going to stick with 45 where we're at. And if you want to do Kaizen events, go ahead and schedule a visit with your people. Eric will set it up. He'll take them over there and we can work on that. But let's split the savings. You're not getting it all. We want half of it. Okay. So just like all of you, we send our proposals via email. We didn't hand them any paper or go to their office to deliver it. Send it via email. Now it's time to meet face to face. So a few weeks later, I depart Denver for Calgary. So this is in the winter. And although I did live in Austria for 4 years, I grew up in South Florida, so I'm not really used to cold weather. And I didn't understand how much colder it is in Canada than Colorado in the winter. So I get there, get off the plane. It took forever to get the luggage, right? Because they can only send people out to get the luggage for 15 minutes at a time because there's a no exposed skin warning on the news. Didn't understand what that was, but I get to my car. It looks like a block of ice. It was a miracle it started. And I make my way through the snow-packed roads of Calgary to Nortel's office. So what happened when I get to Nortel's office? It's the same thing that happens to all of you. So let's think before the pandemic when we were going to our clients all the time. What's the first thing that happens to you when you get to your client's office? The first thing is you give them your ID, don't you? You give them your business card, you prove who you are. And they type you in the system, and they give you one of these, right? So you get yourself a badge. And the badge has giving everyone fair warning that you don't belong there, that you're a visitor, that you need to be watched, right? And did the person who was picking me up show up on time? So Jerry's picking me up. That's the guy I'm meeting. Hell no. I have to go sit in the corner on that furniture that's crazy looking furniture, uncomfortable, in front of the coffee table with all the magazines that you would never read, like Cell Phone Tower Today or like, WiMAX Network Provider magazine or, crazy magazines. So you're sitting there, you're waiting for your customer. I came into this facility full of confidence. I'm ready to negotiate. I've done my homework. I've thought about this a lot. I'm ready to go. And now I got to cool my jets and go sit down. 10 minutes go by. 15 minutes go by. I went from really confident to a little bit less confident over time. I don't know if they do this on purpose, but it felt like it. Then I have to go to the bathroom. Do they have a bathroom in the lobby? No, they don't have a bathroom in the lobby. So now I got to get a stranger to escort me as if I'm a child to the bathroom. So my confidence is continuing to push down, right? I came into this like in the alpha position. I'm ready. 20, 30 minutes later, I'm being disrespected with my time. I'm not allowed to go to the bathroom on my own. I got to go sit in the corner and stew and wait for Jerry to come pick me up. So the dynamics are beginning to shift a little bit. I didn't really notice it at the time, but looking back, the air was coming out of the balloon for me. So finally, Jerry shows up. Of course, he's sorry. He didn't mean to. He had this excuse and that excuse and this excuse. We've all experienced it, right? And he brings me through a bunch of dark hallways into a conference room. Now, does he take me to the boardroom with the big glass windows looking at the mountain range in Calgary? Hell no. He takes me into this little dark room, no windows. There's a projector on, and there's 3 people sitting at the table I've never seen before in my entire life. And as I'm setting my laptop bag down and I have the projector in my face, I turn around and I look at the screen. Now, what do you think's on the screen? I know we have too many people on the call to really workshop this, but what was on the screen was their agenda. And their agenda was cost reduction, payment terms, open book pricing, Kaizen events. Was there anything on there about, hey, we got to figure out how to get Eric a new project? No way. So there I was. I'm alone. I'm outnumbered. And I'm prepared for a completely different agenda. So there's a lot of things that were going wrong with this negotiation. I want to start peeling the onion back with you and talk about, all the things I missed then that I don't want you, if you're a key account manager and you're managing a large account, I don't want you to miss it. So let's get started with that. Preconditions. So most of you receive this. Sometimes you'll get a master service agreement. You'll get some kind of document from your customer or a prospect, more likely with a prospect. Before they're willing to do business with you, you have to agree upfront with certain terms because everybody agrees to this, right? So this is what happened at Nortel, and they did a really good job of setting these preconditions up front. I was so early in my career, I didn't know if I had to agree to them or not. I didn't know if it was mandatory. I didn't know if this was negotiable. I wasn't sure. But I would say if you're out there and you're in procurement, you should absolutely be setting preconditions to negotiation. You should absolutely try to control the contracts and the paper that you're going to sign and put in as many things as you want into that up front. So let's talk about why that is. Number one, this gives you the opportunity to psychologically anchor the negotiation. And we're going to talk in a couple of slides about this idea of going first and why it's important. But Nortel certainly psychologically anchored me on what it is they wanted. Okay. Secondly, what if you agree? I mean, if you don't have confidence in your value proposition, your offer, your company, yourself, you might be tricked into agreeing to these preconditions up front. And if you do that, guess what? The other side doesn't have to negotiate these things later. So it makes their negotiation much easier. If you can get things off the table through preconditions, it's going to prevent you from being required to negotiate these items later in the negotiation. That's going to allow you to gain leverage. So if you're in procurement, this is a best practice. If you're in sales, do not allow this to happen to you. So how do we handle this? There's a lot of ways to handle it. I'm just going to give you my feedback based on my experience, what I would do now. Number one, thank them. I mean, they just gave you a gift. When your counterpart tells you what's important to them through preconditions, you now know what their priorities are. You now know what they want in the negotiation. They've told you. You don't have to accept it, but now you know what's important to them. And when you know what's important to them, this is going to allow you to start preparing a game plan, which we're going to discuss later, and start creating a trading plan between the two of you. We want to get deep now. We know what's important to them because they told us through their preconditions. We've thanked them for it. Now we want to get some insight. We want to know why it's important to them. Like at the time, Nortel was making very strong demands on someone. We had been a partner of theirs for a long period of time. Why were they making these huge demands on cost reduction and payment terms specifically? Some of it was they had some new management in leadership positions. But the other thing that I really didn't recognize is they were going out of business. That pressure coming from the Chinese entrance to the market was literally putting Nortel out of business slowly. It was grinding them down, and they were desperate. And that's why they were asking for these preconditions. So I didn't dig in, and I see that a lot in my negotiation classes. People don't go like that 3 or 4 levels deep on questions and find out why someone wants something. So dig in. If there's something you absolutely can't accept, like I have some clients who have a lot of working capital is very important to them, and they can never accept payment terms beyond 30 days because they need to pay their suppliers or vendors or partners in a timely manner or else they'll lose service. So they think about transportation, okay? So if there's something you absolutely can't accept, let your counterparty know that right away. Don't let it sit. Don't let them believe that this position is acceptable in any way, because you're not going to accept it at the end of the day anyway. So let them know up front, take it off the table. And then also let them know that everything, once you thank them for telling you what the negotiables are, thank them for that. And then let them know that everything is contingent upon the final offer. You can't accept 1 or 2 of these things until you've seen the entire package, the entire offer. Every negotiation is a bundle of negotiables. And until we negotiate all of them, nothing's agreed to. Very important. Make sure you tell them that up front. The other thing they did really well, and something I recommend that you do, is think about the anchoring point, where you're starting the negotiation. They psychologically anchored the negotiation on their preconditions. So let's back up a little bit. Like, why do you want to go first? I had a class yesterday, and someone in the class goes, man, I know I shouldn't have spoken first, because the person who speaks first loses. Wrong. Not true at all. Here's why. You want to go first. Your brain is 2% of your total body weight, but it consumes 20% of your total calorie intake, your prefrontal cortex. So it's an energy hog. And we were designed to reduce the amount of calories that we're burning. Doesn't matter in today. I mean, I could go and get some food right now and replenish my calorie source, but we evolved as calorie preservation machines. And because of that, we always are looking for opportunities to reduce our cognitive load, so we can reduce that burn of calories from our prefrontal cortex. So we make mental shortcuts. One of the mental shortcuts that we all make, you make it, I make it, we all do this, is we give too much weight to the first piece of information we received. Think about it. Just think about the destruction that social media is having on our society. We listen to things on social media, we read things, we watch, we look at memes, we watch videos, and we don't necessarily do the proper research to see if this is true. We just take it at face value, we give it too much weight, and we run with it. We have to be very careful of that. And the reason why we do that is because we are subconsciously trying to preserve calories and reduce our cognitive load. So if you go first and you anchor first in the negotiation, there is a likelihood, not a guarantee, that your counterpart will accept this as fact. They will give it too much weight. And that's what you want. So you want to psychologically anchor the negotiation, because when Nortel did that to me with the preconditions, I was like, is this the way all customers are? I didn't know. I was too early in sales. I didn't know at all. So go first. So here's what I find. In my negotiation class, I do a very simple role play where one person is buying, the other person is selling a piece of art. And I ask them before they negotiate to write down what the opening position is going to be for the seller. So what do you want to sell this piece of art for? And I ask the buyer to write down, what do you want to buy this piece of art for? And they write that down ahead of time. Then they go and negotiate. And what we find is 83% of the time. So I took a whole year's worth of data and I looked at, so hundreds of people doing this exercise. 83% of the time, the parties met halfway between their opening positions. I recognize this is a very simple negotiation. It's not very complex. It's just price. But when you're talking about art, this is something that's very subjective. So there's no real market number to look for, right? Art is very subjective. It can be any price. So that's why I chose it. So 83% of the time, people are meeting halfway between their opening positions. There's two other outcomes I see. One, someone makes an outrageous offer that the other side can't refuse, so they accept it immediately. That never happens in your professional life. None of you give an offer to your counterparty that's so outrageous or so stupid or not well thought out that the other side just accepts it. So we can just say that doesn't actually happen in real life. The other thing I see is people negotiate against themselves. Someone will make an offer. I will sell this painting to you for $1,200. And the other side goes, oh man, that's way over what I was thinking. Can you do better than that? You don't want to be tricked into answering that question. What you want to do is respond and say, are you asking me to negotiate against myself? Because I don't do that. What were you thinking? What is your proposal? So that's how I want you to handle that. Whenever someone asks you to sharpen your pencil, come back with another offer, or negotiate against yourself, is to just throw it out there. Just say, hey, it sounds like you're asking me to negotiate against myself, and I don't do that. Okay, so we'll just have to assume that you're more likely to end up halfway between your opening positions. And if that's true, and if you believe me, then where you start is extremely important. So let's quickly talk about that opening anchoring position. I want you to go first. I want you to anchor ambitiously. I don't want you to be a fool. I don't want you to go too high, but I want you to do something. I don't want you to start, like say you're a salesperson, you work in a company and the company gives you a price you can sell to your customer at for a project, a service, or a product. They're not asking, you shouldn't be starting at that price. You should be putting something on top of it so you have room to negotiate with your counterparty without going back to management and begging for a discount, for example. So be ambitious. Start a little bit higher than what your walkaway or bottom line is, so you have the ability to negotiate on the fly and start making some trades. I want you to do this confidently. So in my classes and in my professional life, I see a lot of people that aren't confident. A couple things I see with salespeople. So if you're in procurement, I'm sure you've picked up on this. People that aren't confident start giving ranges. People that aren't confident begin to explain the offer after they've given it. They don't allow for any dead space. Confident negotiators who make a strong, ambitious offer are completely silent after giving the offer. And this is powerful. So stop talking if you find yourself to be one of the people that can't shut up after you make an offer. I used to be that person. Don't do that. And of course, your opening position should be justifiable. If you give something that's overly ambitious, it's not credible, you're going to have a really hard time working with your counterparty. You're going to spend a lot of energy backpedaling from your position. So be ambitious, be confident, but make sure you're justifiable. Okay? So Nortel did a really good job at this. I would say they were overly ambitious on the 10% cost reduction. That was a little out of hand, in my opinion. So that we, as an organization, so of course my boss and my boss's boss were a lot more experienced than me, and they were like, yeah, Eric, you can forget about that. That's ridiculous. We're never going to do that. Okay, so it was if they would have started with something a little more credible, we might have given that more weight, but they were too unjustifiable. All right, next thing, preparation and confidence. Couple things. I didn't do a good job of preparing because I didn't know how to prepare for a negotiation. So I'm going to give you some ideas that you can use. We don't have a lot of time today, just some ideas for you to prepare for your negotiation, some things to think through, because I want to increase your confidence. Secondly, remember, I went to their facility by myself, had to wait, get signed in, wait in the front lobby for like a half hour. My confidence was really tanking. So if you can, get your counterparty to come to your office for the negotiation. It feels totally different. So if you're in sales, see if you can get your clients to come to you to negotiate. I know it's hard, but that change of venue really changes things quite a bit. And I've had a lot of experience of having really tough, aggressive, competitive customers. We're talking like really big multi-billion-dollar companies come to our office and they behave completely differently. It's amazing. They're like different people. They're like nice and respectful, and it's totally different. So see if you can own the venue as well. All right, so here's a question I've asked hundreds of people who have taken my class. Like, how much time are you spending preparing for your negotiation? And these are the results. So specifically what I'm asking, for every hour that you negotiate, how much time are you spending in preparation? And you can see the vast majority of the people are spending less than 2 hours. Best practice is that you spend for every hour at least 2 to 3 hours in preparation. So 2 to 3x. You're going to negotiate for a full day, spend 2 to 3 days preparing for your negotiation. We're going to talk about some things you can do to prepare, but a lot of that is discovery. So if you're a key account manager on this call, you're in sales, you're managing a sales team, you're already doing discovery, but this is so critical. It's to understand what your counterparty wants and why they want it. So give yourself credit for that if you are going through an extensive discovery process, and think about it in terms of negotiations. So you can see 21.6% of the people that have answered this question on my survey are spending plenty of time, but everybody else is not spending enough time. So overwhelmingly, more than 2/3 of the people who I train are not spending enough time preparing for their negotiations. And it's likely you are also not spending enough time preparing. So think about that. Let's see. All right, let's talk about what you should be doing when you prepare. So we talked about discovery already, but the first thing I want to talk about is I want you to understand what your BATNA is, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. I'm willing to bet that all of you out there, especially in the sales role, have a really good feel for what your alternatives are because you have a pipeline of opportunities. And if you don't close a piece of business with one opportunity, maybe you'll close it with the next opportunity. And the more opportunities you have, the stronger your alternatives are and the more confident you are. Makes perfect sense. Are you spending enough time understanding what the alternatives are of your counterparty? When I was covering this $50 million account for Emerson, I spent almost no time thinking about their alternative to reaching an agreement. Big mistake. What would they have done? What could they have done to move away from us, especially in the short term? Where was our underlying power? I mean, I only had one account, right? So my BATNA position personally wasn't good. But within our business unit, we were covering all the major telecom companies. So we had a pretty good backup position as an organization. And then as a company, we were over 20 billion in sales. We had a lot of customers on a lot of business segments. So as a company, we were really good as far as alternatives. But me personally, not so much. And that affected my confidence. And there's some things I understand now that I didn't understand then. And this is the idea is, can your customers really leave you? And do they really want to? So about 40% of my clients are in procurement organizations. And I often ask them, if you had the opportunity to get a little bit lower pricing, I haven't like really quantified what that means, but if you had the opportunity to get lower pricing, would you leave your suppliers for better pricing? And I would say 99.9% of the time, the answer is hell no, Eric. Why? You know how long it took us to find these suppliers? You know how long it took us to qualify these suppliers? You know how hard it is to find a good partner, a good supplier? There's a lot of suppliers, but not a lot of good ones. So if you're in sales, I want you to consider this. What are the switching costs of your customers? Can they really leave you? And here's some ideas I want you to think about. Like, what is the risk premium for them leaving you? Like, what will happen to them? How much risk are they putting into their organization if they don't work with you? How about timing? Do they really have the time to make the switch? Could Nortel have actually left us? And did they have enough time to design in another supplier? I didn't think about that. Change management. You're going to be changing relationships now between the customer and the supplier. What does that mean? How much disruption will it cause in their organization? Is this important? So if you're in a service type business and you're afraid your customer might walk away from you, what are the change management costs that they will experience if they make that switch? It might be so great that they wouldn't leave you unless you did something egregious or had really outrageous pricing or something like that, or made a really big mistake over and over. How critical are you to their customers? How about, is there really a direct substitution? Too often we think that we're no better than our competitors because we don't spend enough time understanding what our true value proposition is. What is our unshakable value proposition that no one else can claim? And is it true? When we were covering the Nortel account, I did later in my career start taking into account, if they were to replace us, they would have to not only find new suppliers, but they would have to qualify them. They would have to pay for their engineers internally for like 12 to 18 months to bring on a new part number. They would need to pass all the regulatory requirements for Underwriters Laboratory and the CE mark, and they would have to pay for that. So there was if you're in the medical industry, if your customer is going to switch, they're going to have to go through the FDA approval process. Switching costs are huge. So this is a lesson I didn't learn till later in my career. And I was always afraid that if we didn't lower price, our customer was going to walk because I didn't properly understand their BATNA position and what their switching costs were. So the reason why we want to understand our BATNA, which is our alternative, what we'll do if we don't reach agreement, and theirs, is if they have a weak alternative to working with you, or the switching costs are really high, you can be more aggressive in your anchoring position. If your alternatives are high and you have a lot of opportunity, you can, of course, change the point at which you would walk away from the negotiation. So if you have a lot of alternatives, your walkaway position is perhaps going to be much lower. So think about that. So number one, preparing, think about what the alternatives are for both sides. That's your underlying power. Secondly, put together a negotiation game plan. This is something I go through extensively in my training class. We don't have a lot of time, but I just want to introduce you to a few ideas. So this is what you should be doing when you're preparing. So we're understanding what our alternatives are. Next thing, we're understanding what is it that we're negotiating over. What are our interests? What do we want to get out of this negotiation? We're pretty good, if we're the seller, at figuring out our own, but are we spending enough time, asking enough questions, going deep enough to understand our counterparties? Probably not. Okay. Secondly, once we understand what's important, remember I said it's a gift from your counterparty to give you preconditions because they're telling you what's important. Those are the negotiables. Now, can we rank those negotiables? Can we find out what's really important to them and not so important to them? And vice versa, rank what's really important to us versus what's not so important to us. And the reason why is because we're going to use that to determine the sequence in which we negotiate. We want to be very careful that we don't give our counterparty their most important negotiables up front. Because if we do, they'll lose interest in negotiating with us. We will lose leverage. And vice versa, we want to make sure that we are pursuing our most important interests up front, right? We want to get our most important negotiables satisfied early to make us more relaxed, right? If I went into that negotiation with Nortel and I got them to agree to give me a new project before giving them any type of price reduction or negotiating terms or talking about open book pricing or the Kaizen events, I'm going to be a lot more relaxed, aren't I? I'm going to have some momentum. I'm going to have some leverage. Okay, so think about the sequence. And then lastly, think about where we have trades. So we have interests that are shared. We want the same thing. We probably shouldn't spend a lot of time negotiating negotiables where we have the same interests, so shared interests. We have competitive interests like pricing, where we want things in the opposite direction. Usually anything to do with money is competitive, and those are going to be really difficult, right? Our negotiation is going to be hard if all of our interests are competitive. But if we can find some interests that are leveraged or differing interests, these would be interests where it's more important to one side than it is the other, and we can use those to trade. It's going to make the negotiation much easier. So if you put together a game plan and you recognize I have a lot of competitive interests here, you probably need to spend more time and find out what it is they want that you can easily give them or that you can trade for. And that's usually what the secret to breaking a negotiation loose and getting it more collaborative is. That takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of discovery, and not very many people do it well. So find out what your alternatives are, what their alternatives are. Put together a game plan where you identify the negotiables, you identify the sequence so you know how to proceed with the negotiation and what items you want to negotiate first, where your priorities are, and then identify where your competitive and differing interests are. So you can recognize when you have all competitive interests, you can start discovering more differing or leveraged interests where you can start making trades. Okay, so that's what I recommend as far as your prep goes. And then, of course, you're going to be figuring out where your anchoring position is. You're going to anchor more aggressively when they don't have many alternatives. When they do have a lot of alternatives, you're going to have to anchor your opening position a little less aggressively so you don't lose them. Okay. Last one I want to talk about today. This is a lesson I learned, and it should have been, and of course, it's obvious to everybody listening to the story, is I went into that negotiation in Calgary alone. I thought I was brilliant. I just finished business school. My ego was really big. I thought I could do this no problem. Boy, was I wrong. We don't want you preparing for, and we don't want you executing your negotiations alone. And the reason is it's impossible for you to pay attention to everything. Absolutely impossible. We want you to be able to observe the other side. We want you to be able to pick up on body language, on nonverbal communication. And if you're the person doing all the talking for your company in the negotiation, you're not going to be able to pick this up. If you were foolish enough to negotiate with email or text messaging, you're not going to pick up any information, are you? Because you're not going to get any body language. You're not going to get the tone of voice of the other person. So, if you pull one thing away from this section is do not negotiate with email. Hit people on the phone at a minimum, get them into a video call or go visit them personally. But do not negotiate with text messaging or with email. There's no way for you to discern if what they're saying is actually true or not. You're not getting any depth of communication when you do that. So my recommendation is when you negotiate, have someone who's doing all the talking, the lead negotiator, have someone who's doing the observation. So who's really just paying attention to body language, tone of voice, nonverbal clues on the other side. And then have one person who's assisting the negotiator. We're going to call them like the note taker, but this person is making you stay on track with your game plan, making sure that the lead negotiator isn't making any mistakes or going off course. Okay, it's like your wing person, right? All right. So I'll just quickly, this is for talk about visual clues. So this is an example from one of our classes. We're doing a negotiation role play, and someone is going to make an offer. Okay, so this is what the gentleman looked like on one of the teams. So it's just like this call. We have all these squares up. This gentleman, he's pretty relaxed. He's pretty chill. He's on the team that's receiving the offer. He's not the lead negotiator. He's just watching. Okay. As soon as that offer was made, that was his expression. So we caught it. And you can see that his body language changed dramatically from before the offer was made to when the offer was made. And if you're the lead negotiator and you're thinking about, I got to stick to my sequence, I got to figure out where my trades are, I'm trying to pay attention to the person I'm talking to, you might not pick up on this. But I remember during this class, I asked everybody, did you notice how, and I won't use his name, how he changed his expression? And 2 or 3 people were like, oh yeah, we saw that. Okay, he's giving you some nonverbal information. Do you think he liked this offer? No, probably not. So don't negotiate alone. You can't do it all by yourself. Negotiate as a team. All right, so what were the results? Let's wrap this up. Here's what actually happened in this negotiation. So we ended up with a 2% cost reduction. We never agreed to open book pricing. We ended up keeping our payment terms right where they were, and we did do Kaizen events. And, looking back on who I was at that time in my knowledge level, I missed a lot of things. I didn't know how to deal with the preconditions. As I said, I didn't understand how important it was to anchor. I didn't understand that I needed to really spend a lot more energy understanding what they wanted and why they wanted it, so I could figure out if there's any trades. And I went and negotiated by myself, which was foolish because I really, like I said, I moved from very confident to very unconfident in that negotiation. So what happened to Nortel? So Nortel filed for bankruptcy January 14th, 2009, and it was the largest corporate failure in Canadian history. So I should have figured that out, though. I should have known that their BATNA position sucked all along. They were going out of business, and that's why they were so aggressive in asking for what they asked in their preconditions. And we were in a very strong position, and they didn't have the balance sheet. They didn't have the resources to switch away from us. So we didn't need to lower prices. Remember, I said I took over the account. We had been giving away price on declining volume. We didn't need to do that. Okay, so my lessons: don't accept preconditions out of the gate. If you're in procurement, try to use these. You never know. Maybe the sales organization accepts them. Psychologically anchor your starting point. If you're in procurement and you do an extreme amount of research on where the market pricing is and where profitability is in that segment, you can also go first. I've had that happen to me. It's more difficult, though. Usually sales goes first. But in a negotiation, go first and psychologically anchor the negotiation. Prepare, prepare, prepare. I want you to spend 2 to 3x time in preparation, and I want you to make a game plan really quick. BATNA, what are your alternatives? What are their alternatives? What are we negotiating over? in what sequence, and are we identifying interest where we can trade? Okay. And then lastly, don't do it alone. I know you're smart, but you're not that smart. The more minds around the problem, the better. Negotiate as a team. So before we wrap up and start taking some questions, I just want to invite you to join. I'm going to get really deep into these topics in an upcoming class I have in January, and I'd like you to join. So if this is something you're really interested in, you want to go to the next level, really change your career and become a better negotiator, join us January 23rd, 25th, and 27th. It's virtual. I'd love to do it in person, but right now this is virtual. It's going to be 3 hours a day. It's $2,300, but for those of you in this call, I'm taking 10% off. All you have to do is type in KAM, Key Account Manager, in the reference code in the notes section of the form, and we'll make sure you get 10% off. Love to see you there. So with that, Cherie, if you could put a link to the event in the chat window, then you could just click directly on the link from this call. And I'd like to know if there's any questions, any feedback. Anybody?
Hi, Eric, Cherie here. So yes, I actually did put the link in a few times, and there were a couple of questions. So I'll quickly start them off unless the people in question actually want to speak to you directly, which is absolutely fine. But in the meantime, there was a question from Yannick. He was saying, as the founder of a nonprofit, our biggest challenge is to find sponsors or partners with aligned visions for us to present a solid proposal for partnership. What would be a strategical approach to it?
Yannick, I need more detail, brother. Go off mute. I'm not really clear on what you're asking.
Hi. Yes. So I guess I would say typically we're trying to find people that can be consistent, either donors or financial participant in what we do.
Yeah.
Just to be specific, we work in Africa. We do a lot of basketball events, and so we try to promote education through sports. I actually just came back yesterday from Cameroon, Central Africa. So the biggest challenge really is to be able, because a lot of people say, oh, well, what you're doing is great, we want to help, let's see how we can help. But I over the years, I'm starting to realize that yes, people want to help, but also they want to be able to get something out of it. How does it become a win-win situation?
Yeah.
And I seem to be struggling with finding people that have this aligned with the vision and be able to win as well as we do.
I don't know if I'm going to give you a great answer, but what comes to mind is, you really got to start concentrating on what's in it for them, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about them, not you. And I know you're doing a nonprofit. Yes. It's all about the people that are benefiting from this, but what is the interest people have in supporting a nonprofit? Because they do have some selfish interest. It could be just making them feel better. It could be for tax reasons, could be for some other reason, but you need to find out what that is. So I don't know the answer to it, but I would say you need to do more discovery. So I hope that was helpful, even though I didn't give you
I think it's still helpful because that's something that I kind of understand, I kind of get, but I'm just trying to figure out. So I guess I probably would have to do more research on the people that I'm meeting with in order to find out how the proposal would be beneficial to them as well. So yeah, it does help.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, next question. So who do we want to go to next?
Well, I know that Ian actually asked some questions, and then I think Sean actually answered him. But Ian, if you can clarify, because obviously you asked a question quite a while ago, and you asked, is this before or after a good, strong contract has been signed? And you said you assumed before. What were you referring to?
Well, I think I kind of answered my own question. And also, I believe a lot of this depends on what you're selling and the type of business you're in as well.
Yeah.
I guess you can go on to the next question. There are some great questions on here.
All right, Ian, if you need anything offline, just go ahead and drop me a note. Doug, you had a question. Are you still here, Doug? Doug Thurston. You wanted to
Okay,
know.
so sorry.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and read it off. So how would you negotiate an RFP where you are 1 to 3 companies competing for the same new business? So this is what I would really like is if someone in procurement could give some insights. I know we've got some really strong people in procurement on this call. I personally don't like participating in RFPs unless I've helped write it or I have some influence. But just being thrown into the mix and competing on a few competitive negotiables like price or delivery or service, where I don't have a say or a relationship. My personal experience is I usually don't win, and I'm usually just a price check for the other side. So if anybody in procurement would like to add some value here and say, here's how you should be thinking about it so you can distinguish yourself. Actually, one more comment. When you do make your response to the RFP, respond specifically for what they're asking for, but give a creative response as well, which even though they're not asking you for it, they should appreciate it because you understand your business and their business better than anybody. And if you can add additional value by doing something creative, I think that goes a long way. So anybody from procurement want to raise your hand and give an answer? Roberto.
Hi, Eric. Yeah, so I think differentiate yourself. An RFP is a process to try to commoditize your product, your service, your price, and deliverables. The more you differentiate your value proposition, the more you don't send it and present it, the more you find out and establish that connection with the buyer, and actually assess how strong is the RFP. Is really an RFP or is just an RFP process that they have to do, and they're not being able to implement it. So the more you try to break that commodity cycle in the process, there you'll know you're really facing an RFP or a facade of an RFP.
That's a really good point, Roberto. Thanks for bringing that up, because that's right. Is it really an RFP or is it a process that they're required to go through? So great answer. Thank you. Anybody else? All right. Well, I hope you found that useful. Every 2 months, I'm going to be doing a different talk on negotiations, trying to take a different angle. In 2 months' time, I'm going to do a talk on backdoor selling. How can procurement organizations prevent backdoor selling from undermining what they're trying to achieve? And that'll be the topic for the next one.
Sorry, Eric, there actually was one more question. It's the last one. What approach would you take when an RFQ is guided by the anchor of submit final and best offers? Off the bat, they're suggesting it will only be 1 round. Can you see the question?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're right. I see it. The best and final offer. Yeah. I think we're going back to what Roberto said, is you got to find a way to differentiate yourself, because they are, in this situation, they're asking you to go to your bottom line. They want everybody to get as aggressive as possible and go to their bottom line. So the extent to which you can differentiate yourself, create options. I mean, I did when I was negotiating with Philips, I saw this a lot. They were very pedantic about making sure you followed their process and trying to squeeze as much value out of the supply base as possible by putting these really onerous hoops you had to go through. And I think to the extent to which you can take the RFQ process as a strong suggestion and get really creative and ask a lot of questions and really try to solve their business problem, you can begin to differentiate yourself, and you've pulled yourself out of that cycle, to what Roberto said. So I think it kind of goes back to that idea. How do you extricate yourself from this cycle where it's just feels like it's a race to the bottom? Whether it is or it isn't, I'm not sure, but it feels like it, right? So I would always recommend that you give multiple simultaneous offers. You don't just give one single offer. You give, because if you give one offer, that doesn't start a conversation. If I give you multiple offers that are creative, now we're in a conversation. And when we're in a conversation, we can differentiate. So that's my recommendation. Because it's, in my experience, it's not, I think that procurement aren't always looking for the lowest price, shortest lead time, the best payment terms. They're looking for the best solution to solve their business problem. And maybe they haven't defined it properly. But maybe because it's if you're in sales, it's your business, you can identify some areas that would make a huge difference that they haven't even thought of. And that's part of that creativity. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Well, hey, thanks everybody. We're going to finish 3 minutes early. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and thank you so much for joining.